Hey, everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we are one chapter and one verse into the book of Esther. And so far, we haven't even met the lady for whom the book is named. We've just been talking a whole lot about her future husband, King Xerxes, who has had a ton of character development at this point. Now, some of that character development, at least as it pertains to the conversation you and I are having, has happened off screen. It's happened extra biblically in history books and whatnot, but a ton of it's happened on screen. We've learned a lot about him. And further, I think the stuff that's happened off screen is completely fair game, because this would be the most famous person who had ever lived at this point in history. This would be the name the most people on earth would know. And these stories would have circulated widely. People would have known what happened on the Greek campaign. People would have known or heard rumors about where Xerxes' head was at. And they all knew about the fallout with Vashti because he published it in every language and sent it to everybody to let them know. So I think to the original audience, what you're getting here through the first chapter of Esther is stuff that most people would have been like, oh yeah, Xerxes. Well, we heard some stuff about that, but also some stuff where people would have been thinking, oh, there's a little inside knowledge there. There's some details I didn't know. Oh, that helps me piece it together and understand what's going on better. Well, we get to the beginning of chapter 2, and a lot of time once again has passed. Probably about 3.5, 4 years has gone by from the events of chapter 1 into the beginning of chapter 2, and Xerxes has been humbled in a couple different ways. He lost at war, the biggest war ever, something he really hyped up, and also he lost his right-hand man and general Mardonius in the process of losing that war to the Greeks, and he lost his compass, if he ever had one in the first place, over his brother's family and his brother's daughter and his brother's wife. And maybe before any of this had happened, Xerxes had already done some crazy personal soul-level moral crossing of the Rubicons where he just did atrocious things that not only undermine everybody else's trust in him, but undermine his own trust in himself. Maybe he had. Or maybe the events of late 480 and early 479 in the course of losing a war and losing his moral compass with his family, maybe that was the real moment of transition. Maybe that was the bridge too far where his brain started to break. Whatever the case, the only fair treatment that we can offer in terms of a description of Xerxes at this point in the book is that he's not that great a guy. We can feel sympathy toward him because he's a little bit gullible and he gets bullied and manipulated by people into doing things. And it doesn't seem like he really has any friends in this court. Even his wife will do crazy things. I mean, admittedly, he did crazy things first. So I think that's kind of a situation where maybe they deserve each other. But I am not incapable of mustering sympathy for this guy looking at his situation. Also, he's done monstrous stuff. So that's the dude we're dealing with here. Now, this is one of the first points where you and I need to talk about the difference between what we are seeing in the text and what reason tells us and the Hallmarkified version of this story. Maybe some of you have seen portrayals from the last 30 years of Christian culture, particularly Christian culture in the United States, of this beloved story of Esther. Those characterizations, I would submit to you, they're not accurate, they're not faithful to the text. They are an attempt to make an absolutely drab, banal Hallmark movie out of a gory, sexually charged, highly dramatic, dangerous, high-stakes work of history and theology and dramatic storytelling here. Esther is not a tame story about a perfect young maiden who did everything exactly right. No, she's a highly compromised young lady who also got a bunch of things exactly right, and in that, she's like all of us. She's a very relatable character. Some of the film portrayals I've seen of Esther as not just a book, but as a person in the last 20 or 30 years are laughable in comparison to the text, as the people behind these books and these movies try to reimagine Esther as a model of chastity for young ladies. Now look, I am for chastity for young ladies. I am for good decision-making in terms of relationships. I am for overtly biblical values about sex being something that happens within marriage, but there's plenty of other places in the Bible to go and find that kind of source material. What we're seeing in the book of Esther is a different question. Esther isn't a story about a young girl struggling to figure out how chastity works and how to maintain her purity in that regard. Esther's a story about a shrewd young lady who made bold moves and seized opportunities and took calculated risks initially for her own benefit, but over time she evolves as a character and does it for the benefit of so many others at great risk for herself. That is what makes her interesting and compelling and heroic. And these recastings I've seen of her character, I'm sure they're well-intended, but I don't find them compelling, and I don't think they square with the text. One of the other character casualties of these retellings, these reimaginings, is Xerxes, who becomes this highly tameable, well-behaved dude in these kind of adaptations, who's like, I used to be naughty, but Esther is just so dang chaste that now I want to be different. I want to be a better guy, a better king. Well, it doesn't look like that happened. Admittedly, our sources thin out a little bit after the stuff that we're looking at here in the beginning of chapter 2, but Xerxes looks like he held the line in terms of being a ruthless king of kings who held the values that the Achaemenid kings held. And the plot and the themes of this book are how that very sharp instrument that is Xerxes and his enormous power and also kind of lack of character get wielded by an unnamed god for the purposes of protecting his people and advancing his redemptive plan. What we don't get is some wholesale moral rehabilitation of Xerxes, where he becomes a model biblical character who exemplifies the values of the kingdom of Christ. He's flawed at the beginning, he's flawed in the middle, he's flawed at the end, and those flaws are exploited by the bad guys to accomplish bad things, and those flaws are exploited by the good guys to accomplish good things. I think it's really important that we bear that in mind as we look at this text and not try to cram this beloved 2,500-year-old story into some other container or to make it say or be things that it wasn't trying to say or be. And I do think there's been a lot of Christian art, especially in recent years, that makes that mistake. So back to where we are in the text. We got this compromised Xerxes who's beat up and he's lonely and he's made some mistakes and he probably doesn't have a lot of friends right now. And his existing wife, if indeed he only had one at this point, a mistress, she doesn't seem real happy with him. She recently mutilated a rival with a spear, and then the result was the rest of that person's family got killed. So it's a lonely existence being king right now. And at the beginning of chapter 2, it says later, and later is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. When the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. But then the king's personal attendants proposed, well, let a search be made for a beautiful young virgin for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Once again, the big fateful decisions in the book of Esther are not actually made by the king. They're suggested to the king, and he goes along with it. But tomorrow, we got to go and look more closely at what this proposal is all about and what this contest is going to look like. All right, that's plenty for now. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.